Good afternoon and welcome to our last afternoon insights for this year. We're going to keep going next year, but for the last 2024 with the Osceola District Public Schools. My name is Soren Richardson, and with me today I have Alexandra Charles. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us. Today we are going to keep talking about IDEA. So it was last month, right? No, this month, 2 weeks ago in the morning, we started with a series of IDEA. So my coworker Luz Akendos, she presented an overview. So what we're going to do in the upcoming sessions is we're going to really dive into the components of IDEA. So today we have scheduled to talk about FAPE and about evaluations. We're gonna see how the times goes. If we're gonna be able to wrap both. If the hour comes, we're just gonna stop at the FAPE and then we'll just do evaluation next time. But let's see. As we go through the presentations, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We're going to be monitoring those. For those that are going to be watching this as a recording and you have questions, please reach out to me, reach out to Alexandra or Sarah. And we are more than happy to connect with you and have your questions answered. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And then let me make my screen bigger. Okay. All right. So, like I mentioned, we are going to be talking about IDEA today, and more specifically about the rights of a student with disability to free, appropriate public education. Welcome again. As you all know, my name is Soren Richardson. I am the co-director here at PEN, Parent Education Network, which is a program under FND. And I have a son that lives with Down syndrome, and he is the reason that I do this work. And I am here to share experiences that I have had along the way and all I have learned and still learning and sharing with families like yourself. A brief history about FND. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, which means that we get our funding through the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Health. That makes it all the services that we provide to families are always free of charge. We are your training information center. The acronym for that is PTI. And as you may or may not know, within special education, we have an acronym from almost everything. We are also your F2F, which stands for Family to Family Health Information Center. We were funded in 1985 by a group of parents with children with disabilities that were searching for mutual support and sharing of information and resources. That is almost 40 years ago. So, up to this day, we are doing the same work, but on a much bigger scale, serving the whole state of Florida. We serve families that have children with disabilities or are at risk of a disability from birth up to age 26. We also serve professionals, like, for instance, we collaborate with early intervention, early steps, with Project and Fiddlers, Spin, and of course, school districts. One of the things that makes FND very unique is that the majority of our board members, management staff, and our all field staff, we are the parent of a child with a disability or a caregiver or identify as a person that lives with a disability. So one of the things that we are really good at is sharing our lived experience with you. A disclaimer before we jump into the workshop today is that we are not attorneys, we are not doctors, we are not mental health professionals. That means that none of the information that we share with you today can be considered as medical advice, mental health advice, or legal advice. Even though we do talk a lot about the law, and we're going to be diving into IDEA, which is a federal law, we do not give legal advice. We share the rights of parents and how they can apply this and how they can use this within the school district. We share information, we share resources, and we support you and your family navigate special education in the state of Florida. All the information that we shared and all these presentations that we share with you are all research based, and all the resources are vetted. We encourage collaboration with the schools and all different agencies. Let's talk about IDEA. So IDEA is the umbrella for everything that has to do with special education. So the purpose of IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is has its roots in the past when children with disabilities were often excluded from school. So after this, during this time is when the findings they have been compilated, and Congress has stayed the beginning of the law. It's a federal law that ensure that students with disabilities receive education alongside non-disabled peers. And we're going to go into details into what actually the law entails. So on this slide, you're going to see all the major components for in IDEA. So all the findings that they brought to Congress are the foundation for the development of the 6 major principles of IDEA, and which we call the pillars of IDEA. And these pillars that you can see on the slide are free, appropriate public education, appropriate evaluation, individualized education plan, least restrictive environment, parent participation, and procedural safeguard. Today, we are going to dive into free, appropriate public education, also known as FAPE. So what IDEA was, a little history before we go, is it was originally passed in 1975 as public law. And back then it was called the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. And this gave grants to states for the education of children with disabilities. But since then, it has been amended many times. And the last amendment was in 2004. So uh, even though it has been amended, the original purpose has always stayed the same, which is to ensure that children with disabilities have access to free, appropriate education. So the free appropriate education, the IDEA under IDEA ensures that the it's that how do I put it? It's free, obviously free, right? But it also makes sure IDEA makes sure that students with disabilities that they receive special education, the related services, and that these are designed to meet their unique needs, That's why we have an IEP, which is an individualized education plan. And then also to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So these are the three cornerstones of IDEA: further education, employment, and independent living. So, what exactly is FAPE, right? So, FAPE, in terms of federal law in IDEA, is described is to describe the right of a student with a disability to special services that will meet their individual learning needs at no cost to their parents. So that means that special education and related services are free. They're provided to the children and youth with disabilities at public expense, under public supervision and direction, and without charge. Also, they have to meet the standards of the State Education Agency, SEA, including the requirements of IDEA. And FAPE includes preschool, elementary school, secondary school education in the state, and is provided in keeping with the IEP, right? That the IEP has to meet the requirements of IDEA. So with FAPE, you're gonna keep me hear me saying it. It is without charge to parents and children. And then it has to be in line with the IEP under IDEA. At public expense under public supervision and direction of the public. And also it's applicable in preschool, elementary, and secondary school. All right, so on this slide, you can see 10 different FAPE requirements. So that means these are all areas where FAPE is applicable according to IDEA. So we're gonna walk through a few of these areas. First is the residential placement. So this is a placement in a public or private residential program. This is one of the most restrictive environments for a student. And if this is necessary to provide special education and related services to a child with disability, the program, including non-medical care and room and boarding, must be at no cost to the parents of the child. So that means that the public school, the state has to pay for this. Assistive technology. So assistive technology is one of the special factors under IDEA. And this makes that each school must ensure that assistive technology devices or assistive technology services or both um, are made available to the child with disability if required as part of the child's special education and related services and is in the IEP. So on a case-by-case basis, the use of school purchase assistive technology, like a tablet with a specific program on it, um, in the home. So if that's going to be evaluated case on case, that if the child needs to use it in the home or in other settings is required, then the IEP team comes together, have the discussion, review the data, and they're going to determine if this is a requirement, then the child needs access to the devices or services in order to receive FAPE. So if it's outside of school. We also have extended school year services. So this is known as ESY. And each school must ensure that ESY services are available as necessary to provide FAPE in consistent with IDEA. And ESY is determined by the IEP team that includes the school team and the parents on an individual basis. And the services, they're gonna together decide that what services are needed for the provision of FAPE to this child. Also good to mention that ESY is always free. So this is going not at any cost for the parent. Now, this is a part that oftentimes we get questions about non-academic services. So the state must ensure that the following 2 points. So each school must take steps, including the provision of supplementary aids and services determined appropriate, necessary by the child's IEP team to provide non-academic and extracurricular services and activities in a manner necessary to afford children with disabilities an equal opportunity for participation in those services and activities as their non-disabled peers. So if this is something that the school is offering to your typical non-disabled peers, then they have to make the effort and take extra steps to make sure that kids with disabilities also have access to these opportunities. Non-academic and extracurricular services and activities, these could be counseling services, athletics, transportation, health services, recreational activities, special interest group, clubs, you name it. If the school is the one that is providing these activities and are being sponsored by them, then they have to make the extra steps to make sure that the students with disabilities also has access to them. So a couple of points on physical education. So the school must ensure that students with disabilities that they have access to physical education, just like every other child in the public school without a disability. This is part of FAPE. So free appropriate education. So unless the school enrolls children without disability, and does not provide PE to these children without disability, then they don't have to provide it to children with disabilities, all right, in the same grades. But each child with a disability must have the opportunity to participate in regular PE that's available to their non-disabled peers unless the child is enrolled full-time in a separate facility or the child's special needs the child's needs specifically designed special education is prescribed in the IEP. So there are specific needs and that are documented in the IEP. So if there is a specifically designed PE program in the IEP, then the school is responsible for these accommodations and for these services for this particular students. Arrangements that needs to be made so that the student has access to special PE, whether that is through in the school, through the school, or through a private program that the school is going to be paying for. Free appropriate education. And then also if there is education in separate facilities. If this is the case, then the school is responsible for the education of a child with a disability who is enrolled in a separate facility. They must ensure that this child receive appropriate physical education services in compliance with this section. So there are different components when it comes to PE, but the main takeaway is that PE falls under FAPE. It's part of education. So that means that if non-disabled peers are having PE, so must children with disabilities. So the state must have in effect policies and procedures in order to demonstrate that they have established a goal of providing full educational opportunities to all children with disabilities, age birth through 21, and a detailed timetable for accomplishing that goal. Program opportunities. So if they are different programs and services that are available to non-disabled children, such as art, music, homemaking education, vocational education, these must be made available and accessible for students with disabilities. Under FAPE falls also child find. What is child find? So the state has an obligation to include and to find children with disabilities with potential to have a disabilities, whether they are homeless or are wards of the states, whether they're attending private school, also regardless of the severity of their disability. If they are in need of special education and related services, they need to be identified, located, and evaluated in order for them to receive these services and they can be implemented. Also, under FAPE, the state and the school must ensure that an IEP, an individual education plan, or an FISP, that is an individual family support plan, and this is for early intervention, that all these plans, they meet the requirement of IDEA. They are developed, reviewed, and revised for each child with a disability. So there are some requirements in developing an IEP and evaluating it and revising it. We're going to come back to this in a few other couple of weeks. We're going to come back and talk specifically about IDEA. But there are specific requirements under IDEA. Now, this one also is routine check-in of hearing aids and external components of surgical implanted medical devices. So there are a couple of things under this that falls under FAPE. So hearing aids. So each school must ensure that hearing aids worn in school by children with hearing impairments, including deafness are functioning properly. They need these devices in order to access education, and education has to be free and appropriate. Also, the external component of surgically implanted medical devices has to makes that the school must ensure that the external component of the surgically implanted medical devices are functioning properly. And for a child with a surgically implanted medical device who is receiving special education related services, under this part, the school is not responsible for the post-surgically surgical maintenance, programming, or replacement of the medical device that has surgically implanted. So that means that they're only responsible for the outer part, and that the piece that makes the hearing possible. So that's what they are responsible for. That brings me to the end of the first presentation, which is FAPE. We are doing great. So what we're going to do now is we are going to jump into the rights of appropriate evaluation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Full screen. There we go. Make sure. Awesome. Okay. So we are going to jump into the second. Nope. I'm going to go one further here. So we're going to jump here and look at the 6 major principles of IDEA again. So we just discussed free appropriate education, which means that everything has to be free and appropriate. So not just free because it has to be given, but it has to be appropriate for each individual child. And now we're going to go look at appropriate evaluation. Okay. So what does this mean? So evaluation is an essential, beginning, is the beginning step in special education for a child with a disability. So before a child can even receive special education services and the related services for the first time, a full and individual evaluation of the child must be conducted in order to see if this child has a disability that is negatively impacting the education, which makes that they are going to be eligible for special education. So informed parent consent must be obtained before evaluation may be concluded. If your child has been in early intervention prior and had a diagnosis already, when your child ages out of early intervention at age 3, there's going to be an intensive evaluation done again to see if the child still qualifies for services, but under Part B of IDEA, so meaning in the public school. And if that's the case, then that's going to be the basic for an IEP. I think I'm jumping ahead, but that's where it comes from. Let's talk about the purpose about evaluation. So the initial evaluation of a child is required by IDEA before services are being provided to that child. So the purpose for conducting these evaluations are very straightforward. There are 3 of them. So to see if the child has a disability as defined under IDEA, which we're going to look at in the next slide. 2 is to gather information that will help determine the child's educational needs. And the third one is to guide any decision making about appropriate educational programming for the child. So we want for everything to be based on data. So it's not subjective, it's my opinion on what the child can or cannot do, but it's based on data. Now, on this slide, you're going to see we have 14 categories under IDEA. This does not mean that these are the only diagnoses there are. No. So there is a big difference between a medical diagnosis and a educational diagnosis. So as you can see here, we have the autism spectrum. This is a medical diagnosis, but it's also called a category within IDEA. Now, the evaluation that they're going to be doing is to see in how much is autism negatively impacting the education experience of the student in order to qualify for an IEP. Here you can see there are 14. For instance, my child has Down syndrome, but there is not a category for Down syndrome. So then we are going to see in which of these category does his specific need falls. It could be under intellectual disability. It could also be under other health impairment. It could be under language impairment, and you can have more than one category, like a secondary category. Okay, all right. So before a child is eligible under IDEA for services, a individual evaluation must be conducted, like I mentioned before. And there are at least two ways in which a child may be identified to receive an evaluation under IDEA. One is parents may request that their child be evaluated. So maybe you as a parent, you feel that there is something going on. Maybe you don't have a medical diagnosis, but you see your child is struggling despite of additional support, or you suspect a diagnosis. So you can request for your child to be evaluated at no cost to you. And then the second one is that the school system may ask to evaluate your child. This could be based on teachers' recommendations or observations or results from recent tests. So the school system must ask you as the parent permission to evaluate. The parent, you must be informed written about the permission before the evaluation is conducted. It is also good to mention that if you give consent for the evaluation, but then you change your mind, you can always in written as revoke your consent. So IDEA requires school systems to notify parents in writing that they would like to evaluate their child. And this form of notice is what we called the prior written notice. So the acronym for that is PWN. And it's not enough for the school to tell parents that it would like to evaluate their child or that it refuses the evaluation that they requested for their child. Within the prior written notice, they must also explain why they want to conduct the evaluation or why they're going to refuse the request. They must describe each evaluation procedure each assessment, record, and report used as a basis for proposing the evaluation or again refusing the evaluation. They also in the PWN, they must mention where parents can go to obtain help in understanding IDEA provisions, what other options the school considered prior, and why were those rejected. And also a description of any other factor that are relevant to the school's proposal or refusal to evaluate the child. So all written communications from the school must be in a form to the general public can understand. It must be provided in the parent's native language if they do not read English or are not proficient in English, or in the mode of communication they normally use. Maybe it's Braille or it could be large prints as well, unless it's clearly not feasible to do so. So if parents' native language or other modality of communication is not a written language, then the school must take steps to ensure that the notice is translated orally or by other means to parents in their native language or their modality of communication. They also must make sure that parents understand the content of the notice and that there is written evidence that the above two requirements have been met. This is very specific in IDEA. And in one of the pillars of IDEA is parental right. And we're going to come back to that and take a deep dive into this topic. Parental consent. So what this comes down to, if the school wants to evaluate your child, whether it's on their request or your request as the parent, they need to have informed written consent of the parent. This is a separate, that requires a separate consent. The parents is gonna say, yes, I'm gonna give consent. And like I said, also, you can always revoke your consent. So it may also, if there's no consent, if there is dispute, but in pursuing this evaluation, there's always the due process procedure or mediation, state complaint, which we're going to talk about in the last series of IDEA, which is your procedural safeguards. So if the child is homeschooled, maybe you're looking at this presentation and your child is currently homeschooled or has been placed in a private school, meaning that the parents are paying for it or they're using the scholarship, the school may not override parents' lack of consent for initial evaluation of the child. So let's talk about the time frame. So once you sign consent for the evaluation and you are in agreement of the type of evaluation they're going to do, that is when the time starts ticking, hence the clock on the slide here. So there is actually a timeline that the school must stick to. All right. So the initial evaluation must be conducted within 60 days of receiving the parental consent. So the minute you sign, that's when the day starts counting. Or if the states establish its own time frame for conducting an initial evaluation, within that time frame. So let's say if they say we're going to do it in 30 days or in 40 days, it cannot be more than the 60 days that's written within IDEA. So in Florida, once you have given your written permission for the initial evaluation, gathering information and evaluating your child should be done within 60 school days, right? So the 60 school days do not include days when your child is not at school, does not include. It is important to have your child at school every day to help get evaluation finished as quickly as possible and to collect data within the classroom. So a child's initial evaluation must be full and individual, focus on that child and only that child, because we're gonna develop an individual education plan, individual. This is also a long-standing provision of IDEA. An evaluation of a child under IDEA means way more than the child sitting in a room with the rest of his or her class taking exams for that class, the school, or the district. It also entails how the child performs on such exams. Um, and the large scale of tests, group administrated instruments, are not just enough to diagnose a disability or determine what kind of special education related services are needed. Evaluation must use a variety of assessment tools and strategies to gather as much information as possible, relevant functional information, developmental, academical, information about the child. Also, this includes parental input. When conducting an initial evaluation, it's important to examine all areas of the child's functioning to determine not only if the child is a child with a disability, but also to determine the child's educational needs. So there must be a full evaluation that includes health, vision and hearing, social emotional status, general intelligence, academic performance, communication, motor abilities. As IDEA states, the school system must ensure that evaluation is sufficient, comprehensive to identify all of the child's special education and related services needs, whether or not commonly linked to disability category in which the child has been classified. Okay, so there has to be a full evaluations to see where the disability may or may not be impacting the educational need. And then also we are going to review existing data on the child, right? Which could be classroom work, performance on state and district assessments, information that's provided by parents, by therapists, and so on. So the purpose of this is to review. This review is to decide if the existing data is sufficient, right, to establish the child's eligibility and to determine educational need, and or if additional information is needed. The variety. So the evaluation must use a variety of assessment tools and strategies, like we mentioned earlier. So this has been one of the cornerstones of IDEA's evaluation requirements from the beginning. So under IDEA, it is inappropriate and unacceptable to base any eligibility decision upon the results of only one procedure, only one test. Tests alone will not give a comprehensive picture of how a child performs, or what he or she does not know. And we know that one moment, if it's a moment in time, so multiple modalities and times should be used and done. Only by collecting data through this variety of approaches and variety of sources, we can get an adequate picture of the child's strengths and weaknesses. IDEA also requires schools to use technically sound instrument and processes in evaluation. Technically sound instrument generally refers to assessments that have been shown through research to be valid and reliable. So they have to be research-based. And technically sound processes requires that assessments and other evaluation materials be administered by trained and knowledgeable personnel, administered in accordance with any instructions provided by the producer of the assessment, and used for the purpose of which the assessment or measures are valid and reliable. So, for instance, in conjunction with using a variety of sound tools and processes, assessments must include those that are tailored to assess specific areas of educational needs. For example, reading or math, and not merely those that are designed to provide a singular general IQ score. So it has to be specific. So taken together, all of this information can be used to determine whether the child has a disability under IDEA, the specific nature of the child's needs, whether the um, child's need special education and related services, and if so, then to design an appropriate program, which is the IEP. Things to consider, and important during evaluation. So it's important during evaluations to consider tools that are not discriminatory on a racial or cultural basis. Evaluations must be conducted in the child's typical accustomed mode of communication. So if they use assistive technology, and in a form that will yield accurate information about what the child knows and can do academically, developmentally, and functionally. For many, English is not the native language. Other use sign language, right? Assistive or alternative augmentative communication devices. So to assess a child using a means of communication or response not highly familiar to them raises the probability that evaluation results will not be accurate and not give a good picture of the child's strengths and weaknesses. So specifically, consideration of language, culture, and communication modes means that if the child has limited English proficiency, materials and procedure used to assess your child must be selected and administered to ensure that they measure the extent to which your child has a disability and needs special education rather than measuring your child's English language skills. right? So those are two different things. We want to make sure that we are not getting a misdiagnosis. That's why we want to make sure that we are keeping those two separate and really looking at them from different lenses. Also, if your child has impaired sensory, manual or speaking skills, the law requires the tests are selected and administered so as best to ensure that test results accurately reflect your child's strengths and weaknesses. So if your child is nonverbal, then a test for nonverbal persons can be administered to your child. IDEA's regulation specifies additional procedures required to be used for determining the existence of a specific learning disability. You can learn, we have more resources that we're going to be putting in the flyer, the small flyer, that you can learn more about specific learning disability. It is important to note that that IDEA 2004 made dramatic changes in how children who are suspected of having a learning disability are to be evaluated. So here's a couple of the points. So the state must not require the use of a severe discrepancy between intellectual ability and achievement. State must permit the use of a process based on the child's response to scientific research-based intervention, and the state must permit the use of other alternative research-based procedures for determining whether a child has a specific learning disability. And then the last one is that the team that makes the eligibility determination must include a regular education teacher and at least one person qualified to conduct individual diagnostic examinations of children, such as a school psychologist, speech and language pathologist, or a remedial reading teacher. So let's talk about determining eligibility. So we had the evaluations within the 60 days, then they have 30 days for the report, and then we can get to determine eligibility. So parents were back in the day not always included in the team to determine eligibility. In fact, since the IDA amendment in 1997, parents are to be part of the group that determines their child's eligibility and are also to be provided a copy of the evaluation report as well as documentation of the determination of the child's eligibility. Remember that as a parent, you have to make informed decisions on your child's education, and you can only make informed decisions if you actually have access to these reports so you can read and understand or ask questions if you don't understand and need clarification. Some school system will hold a meeting where they consider only the eligibility of the child and related services. And at this meeting, your child's assessment results should be explained to you by a person with expertise in this field that has conducted the evaluation. And also, the tests are being and evaluation procedures and what your child scores means when compared to other children of the same age and grade. Okay. During this meeting, it is important to know that the group may not determine that a child is eligible if the determined factor for making that judgment is the child's lack of instruction in reading or math or the child's limited English proficiency. Okay, so the child must otherwise needs to meet the law's definition of a child with disability, meaning that he or she has one of the disabilities that's listed that we saw under the law, the 14 categories, so they can receive special education and related services. If the evaluation results indicates that your child meets definition of one or more of the disabilities listed under IDEA and needs special education related services, then the results will form the basis for developing your child's IEP. And the IEP is discussed in details in the follow-up presentations that we're going to have. So if you do not agree with the evaluation and you feel like it does not represent your child, under IDEA, you have the right to request an independent education evaluation, an IEE. And this means that the school is the one that's going to be paying for the IEE, and you are going to be able to choose the provider to conduct this IEE as well. So after the initial evaluation, evaluations must be conducted at least every 3 years. So you have the initial evaluation, has been determined that your child meets the criteria for disability under IDEA, meets the criteria to receive special education and related services, and an IEP is developed. We're going to dive into IEP later on. However, at least every 3 year, which we call a triennial evaluation, your child is going to be reevaluated to see where is your child at? What are the conditions? Is there anything has changed? Does the child still require special education or not? And then it's here I want to mention that your consent is necessary to conduct this evaluation. We're coming to the end to wrap up. I want to show you this infographic that sums up our presentation today. And this is also going to be on the small flyer that you are going to have access to. And this recording is going to be on as well. To wrap up here, you can see our programs. FND is the umbrella for our parent training information centers. We have three, POP, PSN, and PEN. We each serve our own specific region. Your PTI is PEN. That's my program. We serve 12 counties from Monroe up to the East Coast into Central Florida. Osceola is one of them. And we have Family Star that is our F2F. They do similar work as we do, but they focus on children and youth with mental health challenges and medical complex needs. Here you can see all the resources, where to find them. and all the ways that you can connect with us. And here you can see our physical address, our phone number, and our general email. And if you would like to connect with me, you can also scan my QR code here. It will download my contact on your phone, and you can share yours with me, and we can connect and talk about more specific questions that you have. And that brings us to the end. We did two presentations in one, within the hour. So I would like to thank Alexandra for being here with us today, representing the school district. I want to thank everybody that's here with us. And for you watching this recording, it's the last, like I mentioned at the beginning, it's the last workshop for 2024. So I want to wish everybody happy holidays, enjoy your breaks, and we will see you back in January. Have a good rest of your evening.